What's up everyone? Welcome to tonight's video. Tonight we're going to take a brief look at editing snake photos. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can catch all of the content that I'm going to be having coming your way on this channel. And one other thing that I wanted to mention was head over to my Instagram page. I'm doing a giveaway over there right now. You'll definitely want to check it out. I'll put a link to the Instagram page in the description below. And just one more thing, if you haven't seen my Gaboon Viper video from my time in Uganda, just click on this link right up here to check it out. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump right over into Lightroom. You don't necessarily need to have Lightroom in order to benefit from this video today. We're going to be covering just some basics of editing that I think will be useful across a number of different software platforms. Now I'm going to be editing this image of a pygmy rattlesnake that I just took recently. And the first thing that I want to do is to think about cropping the image. Now, maybe you don't want to crop the image, maybe you like it the way that it is, and that's fine, but you can use cropping to do some creative editing. The creative process doesn't stop after you click the shutter button. You can still be creative with your editing, and cropping is one way to do that. Now, I do like the way this image was shot, but I wanted to be a little bit creative with it. Now, I'll come over here and click on the crop tool up here, and there's a number of things you could do. So maybe you want to crop it in and bring it quite close into the face to focus on that, something like that. You could do that. That would be fine. I've done plenty of times before. But I'm going to do something a little differently. I'm going to make this a vertical image. So I'm going to make it 8 by 10. And then I'm just going to click it and drag it over here, but staying close to the top, and that eventually flips it vertical. And then I like the greenery, the environment in the background, so I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer, like this. And then paying some attention to the rule of thirds, I'm going to position the eye of this pygmy right about there on this line. So that gives the pygmy plenty of space to be looking into the frame, which generally looks better, I think. And looking over at the side here, I can see a preview of what it's going to look like. I like the way it looks, so I'm going to hit done. And that's what our crop looks like. So it's kind of just a nice creative crop that really changes the look and feel of the image without really doing very much editing at all. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start working my way down the panel here, the editing panel, and I'm pretty happy with the white balance. Sometimes shooting it in the camera, it's too cold or too warm and you have to do a ton of adjustment. The camera got it pretty good here, but I'm going to just bring it up just a tiny bit warmer. Next I'm going to come down to exposure. I'm pretty happy with the way that it is, but it's a little bit dark. So right now I'm going to bring it up 3. Right now I'm going to bring it up 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's looking pretty good so far. Now I want to come down to the whites and the blacks and just talk about that for a minute. Oftentimes when you are shooting a raw image, it's pretty flat coming out of the camera, not a lot of contrast, and so I want to add some of that contrast back in. Now that typically means I bring the whites up a little bit and the blacks down a little bit. Now I want to be subtle with it. You'll notice that I'm not doing any major adjustments with anything in this video. I do want the photo to look like I remember it looking like in the field. I don't want it to look outrageously edited or outrageously processed. I want it to look fairly natural. So everything that I'm going to be doing is subtle. So the whites I'm going to bring up maybe just 3 for them as well, and you can see it didn't do a ton, but it does add a little bit of contrast on the bright side. And the blacks are already pretty dark, so I'm actually not going to touch them this time. Occasionally I will bring them down a little bit, but this time their blacks are already quite black, so I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is come down to the vibrance and saturation. Typically, again, raw images tend to lose a little bit of that, so you want to add a little bit back in. But again, you need to be subtle with it because you can see what happens when you start adding too much vibrance. It looks awful. So you want to be subtle. So again, double clicking any of these will take them back to 0. So I'm just going to click that and then using the arrow keys bring it up 1, 2, 3. So you can see it's a little more saturated, but still looks quite natural, and maybe just 1 for saturation. That might be even a little bit too much, but it's okay. You can see the greens, they don't look too saturated yet. And that's one of the easiest ways to tell if your image is too saturated. Just look at the greens. When you start to bring this up, the greens very quickly start to look too green. So keep an eye on that. So I'm just going to bring this up just 1. So it's added a little bit of saturation back in, but just a little bit, not too much. The next thing I want to do for an overall edit is to come down here and add a little bit of you can see under the effects panel here, there's what's called post-crop vignetting. And I want to add just a very slight vignette. Again, keyword here being subtle. So you can see if I bring it way down, it looks pretty terrible. Oh, that's going the other way, which also looks very terrible. But what I want to do is just focus the attention of the viewer on the face. So I want to just darken the outside edge of the image just a little bit. So I'm going to bring it down 1, 2, 3. Now, that looks pretty good. Maybe is a little bit too much. So I'm going to bring it back up there. Either -5 or -10. We'll go with -10 this time. I think that's an acceptable amount. Still looks pretty natural. Again, if you can tell there's an obvious vignette on the image, then, at least in my opinion, you've gone too far. You want it to be subtle. You don't want it to look like there's a vignette, but you just want it to draw the attention of the viewer towards the subject. Now, the next thing I want to do is a few local adjustments. We were doing overall adjustments that were affecting the entire image. Now we want to do some adjustments that are more localized to just a certain part of the image. So I want to just work on the face of this pygmy rattlesnake for a minute. So I'm going to zoom in, so I'm just going to click to make it big. And the first thing I want to do is just make the eye pop out a little bit. And how I'm going to do that is just this light area here around the pupil. I just want to edit that just a little bit. So I'm going to come over here and click on the adjustment brush. And I'm going to double click effect to make sure everything is at 0, so I'm not affecting anything yet. I'm going to click on show selected mask overlay, so it'll show me where I'm painting. And I'm going to scroll down here to make the brush smaller. You can also adjust this over here in the brush section. You can click and drag to adjust the size of the brush. But I have a mouse I'm using, so I can just scroll down and that adjusts the size of it. So right about there. And what I'm going to do is, that was an old one I was using. What I'm going to do is just paint. And you can see where I'm painting. Right over that. It's a little bit thicker than that section that I want to adjust, but it's not too bad. You can also click erase here, and you can erase part of what you did, make it a little bit smaller again, kind of bring it back to where you want it to be, and then click out of that, and I'm going to come back up here, and what I want to do is adjust, first of all, the highlights. We're going to bring the highlights up, and then we're going to bring the whites up, and you can see that eye starting to pop out a little bit. We don't want to go too far, we don't want it to look unnatural, but if I bring this back out, you can see it's causing the pupil to jump out at you just a little bit more there. So I like the way that that looks. Now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to click New over here and double click Effect to make sure everything is zeroed out. Come back to Show Selected Mask Overlay, make the brush bigger. Another thing to keep in mind is in the brush section down here, not only do you have size, but you have feather and flow. Feather, you can see here, adjust the size of the feathering of the brush, how soft you want the edges to be. And then flow is, if you want to paint something on really subtly, you take the flow way down and you can see it's just painting it on really lightly. If you want to just do it all in one stroke, if you're maybe painting a big area, take it way up and it just goes over it stronger. So in this case, we just want to go over the face quite a bit. So we're just going to use a high flow on there, go around the edges of the face, basically everywhere on the face that's pretty well in focus. There, that's pretty good. Now I'm going to take this off so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to, first of all, bring the sharpness up a little bit. Bring it up to maybe about 25. We don't want to add too much again because we don't want it to look too grainy, but adding a little bit of sharpness really, again, is another thing that makes that face pop out a little bit from all of the out of focus areas around it. Then the other thing we want to do is bring the exposure up just a little bit. 1, 2, 3. And that's going to be another thing that will draw attention to the face of the subject. Now, we don't want to go too much on that, otherwise it'll look like there's a spotlight on the snake's face. 3 may have even been too much. I'll come back down to 2. And that looks pretty good there. So I think we're done with the adjustment brush for now. Another thing you could possibly do is use a graduated filter. So you would just click there. Again, I'm going to double click Effect to make sure everything is zeroed out. And to use that, I'm going to come up here to the top. I'm going to click and drag, and that is going to bring in a graduated filter. These can be diagonal, you can flip them around. But basically, they just are going to affect this part, and they're going to be, depending on how narrow or wide this is, will adjust the feather of the filter. So if you wanted to add to the vignetted look of it, you could bring the exposure down up there a little bit. You can see it's darkening the top of the image and drawing your eye a little bit more to the face of the snake. And again, you don't want to do it like this, because that's going to make, as you can see over here in the preview, a very hard line, which looks terrible. So you're going to want to feather it out quite a bit if you choose to use that, so that it's pretty subtle. You can't really tell that it's there. In this case, I don't think it needs it, so I'm not going to use it. So done with that. So we're back out here to the settings. It's looking pretty good. You can see by clicking down here, shows you the before and after view, and it's looking pretty good. I like the way it's looking. I am going to, I think, bring the exposure, the overall exposure, up just a little bit more. Yeah, I like the way that looks a lot. Now, you may have preferred it being darker. You may have liked it that way better, and that's fine. This is subjective. But I like the way it looked right there, plus 0.6 on the exposure. So this photo, I think, is pretty well done. Well, that's it for the video tonight. Please make sure that you leave me some comments. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you have any questions about any of my editing techniques or how you can do a certain thing, I'd be happy to answer those questions in the comments. Also, make sure you check out my Instagram page, not only because of the giveaway that I have going on right now, but also so you can see some of my different images, and maybe you have questions about how I shot that or how I edited that image, and you can definitely comment on those images, and I'd be happy to answer those questions as well. Hit that like button down below, and I will see you guys next time.